All right, let's hop in. Let's chit chat. Hello and welcome to Canvas. I'm William Lowe. I'm with the Ave team. This is Matthew Kupferer. Say it one more time. Kupferer. And he just finished a great production using Canvas. And so we're going to chat a little bit about it today. So Matthew, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about the production itself?
Sure thing. So it was a production at the Hale Center Theater in Sandy, Utah. It was one of the shows in their regular season. We did Treasure Island, right, which is a story about Jim as he goes on a swashbuckling adventure to go.
You've said this before, I can tell.
He goes on a swashbuckling adventure, putting together a crew of pirates, going to search for some lost treasure. And yeah, that's the story. So it was.
And who's we? I think we should start with that.
Sorry. I was working as the assistant designer for Michelle Ohumukini, who is the lead sound designer. She is the resident sound designer there. And then I've been helping her and assisting her with some of the designs. And she had a lot of other things to work on with some interfacing with composers and the mix engineers and whatnot. And so I was helping her to wrangle Canvas and get the canvas and the sound effects and the ambiences primarily all under control.
And so you two have both had some experience with Canvas 1 already, right? Is that why sort of you were excited to jump into Canvas 2.0?
Yeah. So Michelle has known Chris for a while, I think through USITT. And when I was in Louisville at USITT, I was able to play on Canvas V1 and was really liking some of what it did. And so Michelle kind of had it in the back of her mind as we were talking about this and as she was coming up with ideas of what she wanted to do. And so we were able to test out the Canvas ecosystem on V1 with the previous show that we did with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And so in the meantime, Canvas 2.0 had come out. And so we started using that to help accomplish a lot of the ideas that we wanted in telling our story.
That's awesome. And so before we dive in and look at specific stuff, what sort of generally and just sort of thought process wise did Canvas sort of open up for you to as a design team and really made the difference in terms of your decision making of what playback engine you'd use?
Sure. The biggest thing was it allowed for a sense of movement and dynamic change in a lot of the backgrounds. Because as I was talking with Michelle about this, one of the big things that she wanted with the design was to really immerse the audience in the adventure, because the adventure takes place in a lot of different places, right? You know, we start out with a storm at sea, and then we're at a dock, and then we're at a hillside, and then, you know, we're on a ship traveling through the ocean, and then we wind up in a jungle, right? So there was a lot of very unique and different ambiences that we were going to be traveling through. And so in order to help immerse the audience in the story and in the environment as we travel to all these different places, we really wanted the backgrounds to be as real as they could and to really evolve and move around like they would. If you stand at a dock, you know, watching some ships, you're not going to hear the same pigeon coming at you from the same spot over and over again, right? And so that was one of the things that Canvas allowed us to do very easily, was to move things around our space in a way that a lot of other softwares aren't able to let us do. And so it let us have a very dynamic background ambience that was able to change and evolve over time in a very simple and straightforward way.
That's awesome. That's very exciting. I mean, that's definitely something that we are trying to focus on is providing you with options and abilities to sort of throw something like that together and give that sort of dynamic feeling to things. So,
and it worked out really well. Like talking with a lot of the other designers and the people that were there, it was interesting hearing a lot of their feedback about just kind of how a lot of that stuff ended up panning out. No pun intended.
Did you do any interfacing with other departments? Did you do any of the OSC features or anything like that? Or was it mainly just...
So we had talked about possibly doing some stuff, but we primarily used it as a tool for ourselves, but we were using some other software that let us spit out time code and things like that to be able to control some automation and some lighting moments as well. And so that software also supported OSC outputs. And so that's what we triggered from our console that the operator would take. And then we used OSC to then control everything in Canvas, which worked out really well because it meant that the operator was able to just sit there with their, MIDI trigger as a hotkey on the console. And then that was able to control everything else, including Canvas, as music and his time code was going along.
That's what we like to hear, flawless integration. So speaking of all of that, why don't we dive in and take a look at a couple of things, especially your love for the panner.
Sure thing. Like I was talking about, one of the biggest things that we used this for was to be able to dynamically kind of change our ambiences. And so one of the big things that I did was I created this little 4x4 panner, right? So we had 4 inputs and 4 outputs that had, these just correspond to the channels in a 5.1 file, because that's what I used to create a lot of this was, in Pro Tools, I would set it up as a 5.1 file and then use each corner as kind of its own quadrant. And then each one of these outputs corresponded to one of the sort of the quadrants of the theater, because it's a theater in the round. So we use this, right? We created these paths that the sound effects would follow just over a 2-minute loop throughout the theater. And so as we were playing a sound effect, for example, right? So here's our pre-show ambience. This was going out into the panner. And so each one of the channels, left, right, left surround, and right surround, would then feed one of those objects in the panner. And so over 2 minutes, you would get a slightly different version of a beach ambience playing in the background that would change over time.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And you're just doing that through flags and sending from canvas to canvas. And you've just got one canvas for just all of your panners. So you can think about all those at one time.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was one of the nice things in terms of organization is that, I was able to set up mixers for all of our different outputs because we were talking over Dante to our console, right? And so we were able to set up a mixer for all of our outputs. And then I was able to set up all of these panners to then talk to the different outputs that we needed. So that way it's an easy way to sort of follow the signal path, because you can set it up a lot like a console. You can have your tracks that all get bused to this one spot where you do some bus processing through a panner, and then you can, take all of your panners and then route them to the same output. So it's an easy way to control. And one of the other things too that enabled me to do was to work at home, right? Because I'm going to school in North Carolina, and so I was only able to come out for a couple of days during tech. And so rather than having to deal with some funky patch things internally and trying to kind of wrangle all of those outputs, I was able to set up my own kind of mix down just in the audio settings where I could listen to just a couple of the channels at a time that I needed to. And so by being able to sort of route and, fold all of this down, because everything was going through those mixers, it enabled me to work and program at home and hear what I needed to without actually being in space.
So looking at all of that, do you want to talk a little bit about how you laid out your canvases and sort of what the sort of visual workflow sort of allowed you to do that would sort of be hard in sort of thinking, grasping all of this? Because clearly you got a lot going on and a lot of routing is happening. And so what is this visual opportunity and the cleanliness of just pulling out a new canvas, pulling out a new slate? What does that give you? And how did you use that in this project?
Sure thing. Because save for like 1 or 2 scenes, we basically had wall-to-wall sound throughout the entire play, right? And so we had a lot of canvases, right, that we were using. And so being able to sort of separate things out made it really easy to find what I needed to during a show, right? So if I knew I needed to affect something on a panner, I knew it would be here on this panner canvas, right? Or if, we're in tech and Michelle, my designer, goes over and says, hey, I need you to turn the docks at Bristol down 3 dB, right? It's super easy for me to come over and find, oh, hey, look, the docks at Bristol. Here's my multi-track that has, all of my sound effects in them, right? And so it's like, hey, I need a little bit more seagull. I'm just really digging these seagulls today, right? And so
there's 3 more dB of seagulls. That's super exciting.
So it was great to be able to just sort of segment things out but still be able to talk to everything else. So I could, leave all my panners in one spot. I could leave all my outputs in one spot. So that way, as I'm working on these cues, I'm just focusing on the multi-track.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So here you've got these quad files that you fully built, or 5.1 files, I guess, that you fully built in Pro Tools. What did you do any cutting up of stuff within the multi-track, or was it really mainly just like taking these big files and being able to line them all up together and handle them all in one place that the multi-track gave you?
Yeah, the multi-track was really helpful in that it let me loop things. Right. So I was able to create, just like a 4 or 5 minute track in Pro Tools. And then I let Canvas handle looping that out for however long it needed during a scene. Because, our pre-show, doors open 30 minutes before the show. And if they hold something, you're looking at possibly 40, 45 minutes. And that's, a couple of gigs right there, just of sound files. Right. And I don't want to sit there and wait for Pro Tools to export that. And so the multi-track being able to loop things was really handy in that regard. But also it was nice because it meant we could export things in layers, right? So instead of, so like the docks at Bristol is a perfect example, right? You've got some docks, you've got some people noises like carriages and people in the background, some seagulls, some walla, some water. That would have been a lot to all bounce out as a single file. And then if we're in tech and Michelle says, hey, I need less water, instead of having to go back into Pro Tools and rebounce everything the exact same, just with my water turned down 4 dB, that would have been a nightmare. And so having the multi-track that had everything in there all in one spot playing at the same time made it a really easy way to fine tune and dial in a lot of the ambiences and backgrounds kind of as we were going and get real-time feedback as well, right? Because it's one thing to design on headphones in Pro Tools. It's another thing to be in front of a full system in a big theater.
Absolutely.
And so just being able to have this minute control to fine tune stuff just really sped things up.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. Did you do anything interesting with actions? Did you explore actions deeply a lot? Are there any super exciting actions that you put together?
Actions ended up playing a really big part because it let us chain things together super easily, right? And so the way you might have noticed this in some of the other cues, like in the Dog and Bristol, but a lot of everything has these OSC cues at the beginning, right? That will let the operator just fire one cue that will trigger everything that I need to inside of Canvas. So for example, when we're out on the Hispaniola out at sea as it's traveling off to its destination, we wanted a lot of movement. So we had to send things to different panners, right? That would rock some stuff back and forth and some other stuff that was going around the theater and whatnot. And so we created this. So we had this one OSC element, right? That would receive the OSC string and, get everything going. And then it was connected to these multi-tracks that, it would fire everything all at the same time. But then it would also do some other stuff for us as well. So it would fire the panners to start the specific panners moving that we need for this scene and things like that. Because then on the tail end of it as well, once this scene is done and I've fired my fade out, which again worked the same way with this one fade out being able to control several multi-tracks all at the same time. Once these fade outs were done and the multi-track had stopped, it would then send a stop command to the panner that I don't need anymore. Right. And so being able to, with just these 2 OSC strings, I can start several multi-tracks. I can start several panners all at the same time. And then with the fade out, I can stop all my multi-tracks and stop all the panners I need to all in one go.
That's awesome. Did you do any complex fades or anything with the fades tab a lot? Because there's a lot of power in that little thing that Chris built.
Yep. We will look at the final monologue at the end of the show, kind of as things are wrapping up, and then it transitions into our play out music, right? Which is, more the beach ambience and things like that. And so one of the things that we did was we gave it a boost when some music popped on, right? Because he's talking and then it's bows and the music swells and things like that. So we wanted to boost the background a little bit just to keep pace with the music. And so we were able to use some relative fades to take it and then just change the volume a little bit. And then one of the things that we also played with a little bit was changing the sort of the fade out shape to be able to get sort of the exact crossfade that we wanted, right? So it just helps smooth out a little bit the transition between some of the sound effects.
Awesome. And are those music choirs and SFX LRs, are those just mixers that you got up here?
Yep, these are the mixers, right, that connect to the output system to our audio system just in the first. Yeah, okay, so I labeled them here, right? So
awesome.
So for example, like this opening storm, we have some thunder tracks in them, right? And so I made output 7 just an extra output, and then I went and I routed all my thunder out to it. And then I was able to go into here and then take the opening storm going to music and choir. And then I was able to route that to my thunder or to my sub channel on the console.
Very cool.
And so it was super easy instead of having to like remember which outputs were what. I was able to put it all into the mixers, and then that had things labeled and set up for me.
That's great stuff. That's really great stuff. Did it take a lot to sort of change how you thought about cueing and about how you were sound designing to sort of bring Canvas into your workflow, or was it pretty natural in the way that you thought about it?
Workflow was fairly natural, right? Because we're similar to a lot of things of, I have this cue and I need it to do a certain thing at this certain time. I think one of the things that it really opened up was changing what I'm able to do inside of those cues, right? And so kind of like what we've been talking about, being able to consider movement as another thing that I can use to help tell the story. That one was a really powerful addition into the workflow of thinking, okay, where do I want things to be coming from? How do I want them to be coming from places, right? Because one of the last shows that we did, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, had a panner as well. And so there were moments where like Chitty's driving around, right? And so we use banners to help move Chitty from around the audience, right? As they're singing and driving along, and so that's just something that would take a lot of time and is really resource intensive to try and manage a cue moving around like one channel at a time.
Yeah.
Of telling it to, okay, go to this loudspeaker, but now at the same time, also come up here and also come up here and also come up here, and doing that quickly for a couple of minutes at a time. It's just a lot of very fine detail that you'd have to spend a long time working through. And so instead, this let us just draw something and move the sound effect around the theater. And so it's the small things like that that really open up a lot of other possibilities without really necessarily having to introduce a new mindset about how I'm putting a show together.
Absolutely.
It's kind of hard to show here, but one of the other things that was super handy was the server client setup. Right. And so we had, obviously in the booth, we had our main show computer that was running Canvas, but then I would be sitting down at the tech table with the designer. And so having my laptop out and connected to Canvas as a client to the server that was, connected to the audio system made it really convenient for us to make changes, because it meant I could do things in real time and not have to worry about waiting for a screen share to be super laggy and take 3 seconds for me to scroll anywhere. And so that was super convenient, and being able to sit at the tech table and edit the show file in real time without a lot of the latency and delay that other options I found have.
Absolutely.
And with that too, there was a couple of times where Michelle would be like, hey, I need to add some sound effects, some new layers into this. And so I'd sit there and I'd bounce out what I needed in Pro Tools. And then I'm able to drag on my computer at the tech table. I can take that file that I just bounced from Finder, drop it over here into this palette window, and then it shows up on the other computer, right? And so without having to get up and leave or, bother the A1 that's mixing or anything like that, I was able to add files to Canvas and have them play right away in the system, which was... And
even if Michelle wanted to put it in herself on her computer, you just upload it to Canvas and she's got it on her machine.
Yep.
And now nobody needs to bother the A1 at all. No, absolutely. That's super great.
Yeah,
that's really great.
That was incredibly convenient. Plus, it also let us monitor too, right? To make sure that, because it pops up on the active cue list as well on the client. And so it was super convenient as we were watching, the OSC strings come in to make sure that all my actions triggered, or see like when they were taking cues and be like, oh, we need to move this, a couple of lines earlier or things like that. So it let us do everything that we would on the normal computer, but in the convenience of being at the tech table, not having to worry about bothering the A1.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Matthew. This was really exciting. I'm really glad that you loved working with Canvas.
It was great.
Thankful to you for willing to share your experience with us. And
happy to.
Any final words? Any final thoughts?
No, I'm just excited to see where it keeps going. I know some of the things that Chris has in the pipeline that I'm excited to see
pan out.
But I'm excited to see kind of some of these next steps that Chris is releasing into Canvas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Matthew.
No problem.